Well, hello and welcome to VLGA Connect. It's our weekly governance update, which I've started informally calling the Governance Grill. And who's on the grill? But as usual, Stephen Cooper. Hello.
Hi, Chris. Looking forward to being fried by you. Thank you.
Let's be clear, it's very different to a roast. Okay.
Oh, stop it.
Nice to see you again. What's the week been like from a governance perspective, he says.
Chris, where does one start? There's a bit going on in the space, and I suppose we probably should start with what's happening in Spring Street and just work our way across the state.
Look, quite seriously though, lots of theories and talk going on around the sector this week that I've picked up on because there's going to be a change of minister for local government, obviously, and we're not here to litigate the issues that were exposed on 60 Minutes other than everyone's obviously shocked and concerned. But in terms of a change of minister, really clear, I think, that people don't stop what they're doing and assume that things are going to change, particularly in relation to the implementation of the new Act.
Good point, Chris. It's an office of the Crown. At some stage, the Premier will appoint a new minister and they'll receive a letter from the Governor. And the business will continue, but in the meantime, there is a program of work that's in place, and until you hear otherwise, presumably the best advice is to keep going.
Yeah, so there's talk about relitigating single-member wards and the ward structures that the previous minister was championing, etc. Those political processes will happen, of course, but from a governance professional point of view, it's stick to the plan until you're told otherwise.
I think that's true. If individual councils choose to do that, that's a matter for them. But yes, you're right, until such time as the rules change, we just keep going.
So in terms of the implementation of the elements of the Act that we've been touching base on a weekly basis, has anything new come up this week that would impact on those project plans?
No, I think it's one of those sort of topics, Chris, where there are people across the state working on that deadline of 1 September and how to get there. And I suspect what a lot of finding is that classic case of the more you know, or the more you find out, the more you realise you don't know. And there are a lot of arrows to crawl down. I think what's really important is that councils be aware of their own level of maturity, particularly in terms of those high-level policies like community engagement and transparency. The policy should be achievable. But the bottom line is you've got to comply with the Act, and paying attention to those integrity agencies' reports. They're the areas where people will be brought undone from a compliance point of view if that work's not done.
Indeed. I heard a whisper, Steve, I don't know whether you heard this one, that LGV is planning a webinar perhaps, or some sort of engagement event very soon for practitioners.
I heard a little whisper like that too, Chris. Not sure of the date, but watch this space. I think it's a really good opportunity for the sector to engage with the department.
You mentioned the integrity agencies. I did notice, and I know you noticed, in fact, I know you noticed because you brought it to my attention.
Thank you, Chris.
The inspectorate has chosen to retweet some of its earlier material from earlier in the year, I should say, around conduct. Why do you think they've done that in particular?
Well, Chris, I always think that if the integrity agencies post something out, is that they think that people should read them. And if they've retweeted what was a piece from their March or their autumn update around councillors engaging with the organisation, code of conduct, the relationship with the organisation, you can only presume there's a sense that that's a topic they think that council should pay attention to. And we know that in an election year, it's always a difficult year because that sort of a political overlay of what's going to happen in November starts to affect everyone. That can affect relationships and patience and good governance, I suppose.
You, as I have been running these candidate workshops on behalf of the VLGA, few under the belt now. Conduct issues are one of the ones that come up quite frequently. People really, I think, understandably can be a bit confused or challenged by the whole conduct regime, the conflict of interest regime. Sort of really underscores the importance of this coming mandatory training, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, Chris. And the difficulty is that you can't regulate good behaviour. You can't regulate good conduct. And you would know that with stuff as well. You can have a code of conduct, but if the environment's right, people will make interesting decisions. I've been really surprised, and I'll be interested in your point of view if we can turn the questioning table, as to at times how little some people know, quite reasonably, about the roles and responsibilities in the organisation, including the role of the CEO compared with the role of the counsellor.
So you've flipped the grill, Steve. Look, I think it's a really good point. And some of the sessions that we've done in recent times has exposed for me too how little perhaps potential candidates understand that distinction between the role of the counsellor and the role of the CEO. And it goes to, I think, the heart of this issue about candidates and ultimately new counsellors fully appreciating the bounds in which they need to operate legislatively from a compliance point of view. And I think there's a bit of shock sometimes when they realise that just because I'm a counsellor, it doesn't mean I can't get that road paved or tell that officer to do that thing. And again, underscores the importance of the mandatory training, which I applaud. I think it's been long overdue. And if candidates can be more informed and know what to expect, obviously that's going to create, I think, a better counsel from the get-go.
I think that's right, Chris. In terms of expectations, I'm sure a lot of new counsellors, and what I've heard is, don't understand or aren't told beforehand how difficult it is to get their projects up by getting the agreement of their counsellor colleagues, that sometimes that takes time, that there's a lot of the council budget that effectively is locked away before you get there. So the level of discretion is not great. So there's a whole lot of frustrations and conflict in the role, and people being aware of that early is a really good, good thing for them. I think the other thing too, Chris, is that over time, and you've noticed this, that the compliance burden on councils has increased, that what was previously just seen to be good management practice has now been legislated because obviously people aren't doing it. But the risk we run is that it's seen as compliance, not just good management. And so it doesn't necessarily get people's hearts and minds. Chris, one piece of homework that people could do, I was watching during the week a recording of the 1+1 interview between Barry Cassidy and Peggy O'Neill, the Richmond club president. And it's a really good piece of homework because Peggy talks about being clear on accountability, the role that emotion can play in performing your function, because it must be frustrating if you think you're the only person that cares about an issue and you can't get your colleagues or the officers to buy in.
I'm glad you said the word Richmond, because it's reminded me that Richmond supporters are very quiet this morning for some reason.
Actually, I was thinking it wasn't the best week to mention that particular example, but they've had their share of success.
But going back to the point you make, I think really it's an issue that perhaps we could flesh out on a future governance update. This issue that comes up often about candidates with a particular issue that they want to prosecute if they get into council, not understanding perhaps that they're going to require other like-minded councillors to support their view if they want to actually affect that particular issue. But also one that's come up this week is, how do I avoid Winkie popping myself when I do have a strongly held view about something? I'd like to become a councillor so that I can affect that issue. I think that's something we could explore a bit and perhaps help people.
I think so. And again, that's an issue that I presume it's your experience too, that attendees at the candidate workshops aren't clear about this dance that's important to go through of taking an open mind into the chamber, which is not necessarily that you don't have an opinion, but you've got a mind that's capable of being changed.
Correct.
And, it's an important issue. Yeah. Isn't part of it too, Chris, I'll take a bit of a leap here, and we've talked in the past about, if people want to go back to a textbook, about Patrick Lencioni's model of 5 dysfunctions of a team, that one of the sort of small things that can work is for councillors as a group very early on to learn to trust each other, to learn to have constructive conflict over small issues, so that when big issues emerge, they're well practiced. It's just part of the way that they operate, and presumably that's the sort of thinking that will be going on over coming months.
Good point. Great text that from Lencioni. Recommend that to anyone. In fact, Patrick has recently brought out a new book. The name of it's just escaping me. So he's still producing some terrific stuff around culture.
It's a great model.
Thank you, Steve. As always, great to grill you here on the Governance Update. I hope you have a great week, and we'll catch up next week.
Look forward to another bait, Chris. Thank you.
That's VLGA Connect and our weekly Governance Update. Thanks for your company.